everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Great American Story. We have been spending some time with you exploring some of the distant history of America's past. I'm Ron Hoon, along with John Noetzel, the creator of The Great American Story. And this time around, we're actually going to fast forward to the 1900s, John, and a story that everybody should know, but I'm not sure everybody does.
I'll be honest with you, Ron. I had no idea about this story when you told me about it.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
I've done a lot of research in the last few days over it, but what a crazy story that this one is.
So, in a nutshell, we were in the very waning days, literally the last couple of months of World War II. And it was a very foggy day in New York City, and there was an aircraft that should not have been in the middle of all of these tall buildings in Manhattan. And on a very foggy Saturday morning, I think the pilot really must have lost, his bearings as to where he was. And when he finally realized it was too late to either abort the flight or to veer out of the way, and he literally took that plane accidentally and plowed it right into the Empire State Building.
It's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, it truly is. I mean, we think about 9/11 and what a horrific day that was, but amazing to think that, 1945, the summer of 1945, something eerily similar happened in Midtown Manhattan. The tallest building in the world at the time, the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. We didn't have the World Trade Center at the time, so this was the construction, just the gem of the world, right?
By the way, I think it was 102 stories when they completed it, and they built it in just over a year.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, had to be at record speed, and America was just adjusting to the fact that we could build buildings of this size.
4.5 stories per week, from what I read.
We're
going up on that building. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing.
And so, it was a B-25 Mitchell bomber that had been retrofitted basically to fly military VIPs to their various destinations around the country, moving them around. And he was a relatively young pilot in his mid to late 20s, I believe. And that was Lieutenant Colonel William Franklin Smith, who had a lot of experience on sorties during the war.
That's right,
in
World War II
Europe.
vet, yes.
And just somehow got disoriented and was honestly in the wrong place at the wrong time. 14 people died, including the people on the aircraft when it crashed into, I believe it was about the 78th and 79th floors of the Empire State Building. And a number of people died inside the building, but there are also amazing stories of survival that we can get into today.
There truly are. And the fact that this happened on a Saturday probably saved a lot of lives, believe it or not, because there were fewer people in the Empire State Building at the time. The most of, if not all of the casualties from inside the building were from the National Catholic Welfare Conference in their offices there, along with the pilot, and I believe there were 2 other people on the plane, along with Colonel Smith.
Himself, And we'll talk about, I know there's one story that sticks out in my mind. We can all get to it here over the course of this next half hour. But there was a woman who was working as a bookkeeper just a few stories below. And when you think about, no doubt he was trying to, kind of veer out of the way or pull up, that kind of a thing. And just a few stories below, when she heard the crash, she ran out, looked up, and looked down, and all she could see was fire. There was fire from up above, and there was fire down below her, as well as the unthinkable had just happened.
Can you imagine we go back to 9/11, and we had the media of the day that was covered live. That was a live event covered on national news. Right. But back then, we didn't have 24-hour news, and we didn't have the technology we have today. Can you imagine what was going through people's minds. And, I think this is a good segue, actually, because we actually do have a newsreel from that day. And I got to give a shout out to our friends in New York who sent it to us. Mm-hmm. But let's take a look at that right now.
The tallest building in the world. It is 1,258 feet high and has 102 stories. An Army bomber at high speed flew into it, exploded, and set a raging fire. The two-motored bomber was lost in the fog and hit the 78th and 79th floors. And these exclusive motion pictures show the Empire State Building burning like a great smoky torch with flames bursting from the windows. Hurrying to help nurses and doctors, for there are tragic casualties of dead and injured in this disaster at the towering upper part of the loftiest of skyscrapers. The 79th floor, headquarters of the Catholic Welfare Conference. People were working here, though not so many on a Saturday morning, or the horror would have been greater. Part of a propeller, and the hole where the plane smashed through the wall.
So here is just a little bit of the setup as to what was going on, and then of course we'll talk about the crash itself, and then the aftermath. But it was the tail end of World War II. Yeah. Germany had already surrendered. We just experienced the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day.
That's right, May 8th, right?
VE Day. So that was May. This event, when it happened, was on a Saturday morning in July, and in a matter of weeks, the U.S. would then drop the atomic bomb, 2 of them, on Japan, and World War II in the Pacific would come to an end as well.
That's right, and they had just tested the atomic bomb 13 days earlier in New Mexico, so it was being prepared, and like you said, it was actually 9 days later. Hiroshima, we dropped it on Hiroshima. So yeah, it was an interesting time in American history, right?
And the greatest secret of the entire war, I mean, they kept that so under wraps. Now historically we look back and it's a moment that everybody knows about, but back then they would have done everything to protect that secret, whether it was at Los Alamos or in my part of the country, the Hanford Nuclear Works up there in Washington State. But so this aircraft had left Massachusetts on that morning.
That's right.
It had kind of, I guess it had kind of diverted to pick up one more passenger, a 19-year-old young military man, who wanted to fly. Basically, he was hitching a ride to fly to see family in New York City. And the goal was to land at the airport in Newark, New Jersey. But the closer they got to New York, they realized that there were going to be some problems.
He actually was going to go to LaGuardia, and they veered him to Newark.
And so, LaGuardia said, look, we're too socked in.
That's right.
And so this, it was originally a twin-engine bomber, but it had been retrofitted basically as a kind of a VIP passenger.
And it wasn't armed either, we should mention. There were no bombs.
Could you imagine? Thank goodness for that.
Right.
Okay, so they told him that we're socked in by fog, and then radio communication at Newark said, all right, we have you, come on in, but just be aware, there's intense fog over the city. And even the top, I believe they even mentioned in the radio communication, even the top of the Empire State Building is obscured.
That's right. That's the actual last transmission from the tower to the aircraft. He said, at present time, I can't see the top of the Empire State Building.
Yeah, that's the radio.
That is the tower.
ATC,
correct. Yes.
Communicating with his pilots, which should have been a heads up.
Now, from my research, he just missed the Chrysler Building as well. So
right. And I believe he kind of veered around the RCA building.
Yeah.
But then he couldn't miss the Empire State Building. I mean, there had to be so many moments of panic.
Yeah.
When he suddenly realized, and it's foggy, and all of a sudden, you're kind of coming out of the fog.
Right.
And you're realizing you're in this forest of tall buildings, and it wasn't where you thought you were.
Have you ever been in a plane fogged in where you just don't know which way's up?
Sure. I'm like, thank goodness for well-paid pilots.
Right. So, and I don't know how instrument flying was back then.
Right.
But then you throw in tall buildings, and that changes the whole calculus, right?
Matter of fact, let's take a moment here just to. So the building of the Empire State Building was such a feather in the cap of the United States, proving that we could build this 100-story plus building.
Yeah.
And as you said, John, they built it so quickly. I mean, it was built in just over 400 days.
That's right.
And it was the tallest building in the world. And it stayed the tallest building in the world until 1970, when New York reigned once again, but that was when the World Trade Center came.
That's right. Yeah.
Now we see, there are cities in Asia, there are cities in many parts of the world that build these super tall buildings. But this building was so large, and I know you have plenty of interesting facts and figures, it had its own zip code.
Wow.
I love that, which, by the way... 10118. If you're ever mailing something to New York and the zip code is 10118, it's going to the the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
How about that?
That's amazing.
Right?
I mean, it is the most photographed building in the world.
Yes.
To this day. And like you said, it was just amazing how fast they put that up. 410 days. Just amazing.
Here's one other interesting fact about it. It really is the lightning center of Manhattan. If you've ever seen those pictures are out there of lightning coming down and hitting the tower, it's actually hit on average, John. They have their stormy season too, but on average, it's hit by lightning every 2 weeks.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
Wow.
About 20 to 25 times every year, lightning strikes that building.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It really, truly was and is an amazing feat of construction. And just what a crazy story that summer day in 1945.
So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the moment of impact and what was learned that day, and one incredible story of survival. And also, we better get to our question, John. What's today's trivia question?
Sure thing. What was the original purpose of the Empire State Building's mast, which was never fully realized?
Okay.
So it's A, to serve as a lighthouse for ships on the Hudson, B, to function as a weather observation station, or C, to dock dirigibles for passenger boarding.
John knows the answer. I do not, but we'll all find out here right after a quick break. And welcome back to the Great American Story. Today we're talking about an event in history that goes back to the year 1945, just weeks before the end of World War II, when one of the worst aviation accidents in our nation's history, certainly over that time frame of the war, happened when an aircraft plowed right into some of the upper floors of the Empire State Building. Johnny, let's get back to that question of yours.
For sure. Okay, what was the original purpose of the Empire State Building's mast, which was never fully realized?
Okay.
Ron, what do you think?
I'm hoping that it was to serve as a dock for dirigibles for passenger boarding, because just that whole era of the Zeppelins, floating above New York City. There are pictures out there from that era. That's what I'm hoping, John. I'm going to go see.
You are spot on. Absolutely. In fact, the radio tower, or the radio antennas, the antennas that are on top of the Empire State Building today, were not part of the original construction. That was added later. But the mast, there was that point there, and that was a mast that originally they wanted to dock dirigibles up there.
Wow.
The Germans at the time, who were kind of ahead on the whole Zeppelins and that type of transportation, thought it was ridiculous because the winds up there just wouldn't allow it.
Sure.
And the only way that they could do this would be to have basically to allow the blimp or the dirigible to rotate with the winds along with the catwalk that people were supposed to walk down, you know,
Right.
over, you're 102 stories off the ground, and people are supposed to walk down a catwalk that's spinning.
Yeah.
It's basically a weather vane at the top,
Right,
the
sure.
top of the Empire State Building.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, up that high, you got your own weather systems happening.
So that never really worked out.
Yeah, no, it didn't.
A lot of people think this was a publicity stunt anyway.
Yeah.
That the builders and the construction people were like, let's promote this as part of it. Never realized.
Just to give you like a for instance on what a crazy idea that was. Have you ever been on a jetway just trying to walk down to your 737 or your A320, and all of a sudden they have to move it back 6 inches,
Exactly.
or up 4 inches,
Right.
you know, so you can get on the aircraft?
Yeah, yeah.
Imagine this with 40-mile-an-hour winds
Indeed.
whipping you around. I could just see how
Right.
that was not going to work,
Right.
or you might say how that was not going to fly. Johnny.
So we're July 28th, right? We're middle of the summer. It's really foggy. It was established this was pilot error, right? That this was he shouldn't have been flying in that fog. Mm-hmm. He lost sight of where he was,
Right.
and unfortunately there was this tragedy. I think it's really interesting that one of the engines of that plane went through the Empire State Building and landed on another building.
Yeah, about a block away.
He was going 200 miles an hour.
Yes.
That was the speed. So just imagine the impact and the size of that hole. I mean, I've got a couple pictures behind me on our set here, and one of them is the hole in the building. Just massive.
About
the other engine
18 feet by 20 feet, I heard.
Yes.
And yet the structural integrity of that building, which would never have been tested in a way like this before, it held.
Can you imagine that? That's amazing.
It really is.
Amazing. The other engine ended up going down an elevator shaft.
Right.
You know, so imagine that, and imagine again being on the street, being a passerby, being a New Yorker, and looking up, and I mean, there's some sound bites that we're going to play here in just a minute.
Right.
People felt the ground shake.
Yes, right. Now, one of them was a guy who was working across the street in a department store. And apparently he said to one of the clerks there at the department store, could that have been an earthquake?
Yeah.
How odd.
Isn't that crazy?
You know, was it an earthquake? What was it? I mean, people, after the moment of impact, I think one of the things they were concerned about was that it could have been, Nazi Germany was sending flying bombs over the English Channel to bomb London, buzz bombs, as they were called. And I think some people were worried that maybe New York City was under attack.
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy. Well, let's listen to a couple of these sound bites. I think they're pretty fascinating, and let's take a listen.
This accident of the airplane crash in the New York State Building happened around a few minutes before 10. I was pretty excited at the time. I heard an airplane, before this really happened, I heard an airplane flying very low, and the airplane seemed to be in trouble, and I immediately ran through the window and looked out. And within a few seconds it crashed into the Empire State Building and exploded, and in fact all the oxide gas went right into the building, and within a few seconds the entire building was ablaze.
I was looking out of my office window this morning at 9:51, and I heard the sound of an airplane. It seemed to be flying very low. As I looked up, I saw the plane seem to shear right into the Empire State Building. A tremendous burst of flame shot out, shooting out about, I would assume, 15 to 20 feet. And then a tremendous explosion. The street itself seemed to be a shambles as people started flying to the shelter of the buildings, and pieces of glass and parts of the plane started to fall into the street. For a time, you felt that you wanted to run yourself and put your head somewhere, because it seemed as if the whole Empire State Building was going to topple. And to me, it was the most unforgettable experience, one that I shall never forget.
People yelling and people running. I ran out. I was right near the door. I saw the part of the airplane part, like a wing, come down in the street, floating down. I saw the fire shooting out of the Empire State Building.
When you think about the firefighters who, I guess they would have had to have prepared for high-rise firefighting. There was a movie back in the 70s, John. Maybe you went to it. It was a blockbuster. It was called The Towering Inferno.
Of course, yes.
Remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
This is a little retro for you younger viewers.
Absolutely.
But just the whole idea of trying to fight a fire, in this case, about 80 stories up. They got up there fast, and they did everything they could to try to rescue people. And save lives, and frankly, save the structure of that building.
Yeah. I read somewhere that this was the highest firefighting effort ever attempted.
Okay.
Now, that may have changed since then, but at the time, obviously it would have been. But yeah, I mean, can you imagine? Elevators are probably out, right?
Oh, of course.
So you're running up those stairs
Yes.
with all that gear.
Almost 80 stories, fully geared out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
When we talk about the elevators, there's a great story, and you know where I'm going with this.
Yes,
There's a woman,
Betty Lou
yeah. Oliver.
Yeah, she's a kind of our favorite coming out of this entire story,
right?
Because of what she went through and how she survived. Go ahead.
So, well, she's the elevator. I guess you would call her she worked the elevator.
Yeah,
right? She worked
elevator operator. Back in those days, right?
Right.
You got real customer service. Nowadays, John, you're expected to walk onto the elevator and push your own button. Not in those days,
right?
You had an operator.
Yeah.
Which floor can I take you to? That kind of a thing.
So Betty Lou's based on the 80th floor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the plane hits basically on the 79th floor.
Yeah.
And it explodes, right? I mean, she's thrown from the elevator. She's got serious burns. Yeah. She's alive, but she's seriously injured. So firefighters arrive to help her. Yeah. She's alive. They put her on a stretcher and put her into another elevator to get her down to the ground.
Right.
Little did they know that those cables on that elevator had been weakened by the impact, and those cables snap. Oof. So you're on the 80th floor. You're about 1,000 feet up in the air.
Right.
Betty Lou is on a stretcher plummeting to the ground in an elevator shaft after surviving the initial impact of that plane.
I'm trying to visualize in her mind. I don't know how long that ride would have lasted to go down, at that rate of speed. To go down basically 80 floors, but it was more than a second or two.
No doubt.
I mean, she had, who knows, maybe 20 seconds to think about it.
According to reports, she was fully conscious, and she reported that she felt like the elevator was rushing away from her, and that she had to hang onto the sides to keep from floating.
Oh,
I mean, can you just imagine the
like
weight,
that,
almost
right?
like a weightlessness, right?
Right.
So the amazing thing is she survived that
That's
fall.
the most incredible.
She survived that fall.
Yeah.
Two things probably saved her life that day. First off, the air rushing in that elevator shaft may have actually slowed the, you've got air rushing in and it's pressing against, gravity's pulling it.
Right.
So
creating
there was that.
a de facto air cushion.
Yeah.
That you could prove scientifically, but you would have never known would even exist.
The other thing was that there were a bunch of cables that had snapped and were seated at the bottom of the elevator shaft that likely provided a cushion for her.
Yeah, like coiled versions of a life, like almost like a life-saving pillow or something that's down at the bottom that was there to save her life.
So she hits the ground. Now, she was seriously injured. She broke her pelvis.
Right.
She broke her back. She broke her neck. She fully recovered, Ron, and went on to live 54 more years.
Yes, I believe
kids and grandkids. And,
right. I think when I was doing my research, I think she lived a long, happy, healthy life. She was 20 years old
at the time
when this happened. I believe she lived to the end of the century, to 1999.
She did. She died at 74.
Yeah.
And but never talked about that.
Which is so interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, if you go look it up as a Guinness World Record, I don't think anybody's ever going to be breaking that record.
No, it's still, yes, that's right. So
the
it's
longest free fall in an elevator
survived
shaft.
in an elevator, that's right.
And yet, what a remarkable woman she must have been. to fight this the way she did during her hospitalization, and then to get on with her life, to have a family, and as you say, to have kids and grandkids. My understanding is when she was in her last day, they surrounded her, and yeah, she didn't like to talk about it very much. I guess each of us, if we were in that situation, you know, who knows whether we would want to talk about it anymore or just kind of move on.
Very
right?
true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well,
amazing.
it really is. And so we talk about Betty Lou Oliver. You know, there was this, as I mentioned earlier, there was a bookkeeper. I don't have her name here, but she was on the 70th floor, heard the crash, looked up, saw fire above her, fire below, and she escaped and managed to get out of there by, in the dark, going down 70, maybe 72 flights of stairs. Amazing. The stories of survival are really remarkable, and yet there was a great loss of life, and it was a real tragedy.
It was. It really was. At a time when optimism in the U.S. was probably on the rise with the end of the war.
Right. Well, we called it Skyfall, and it was the day the empire shook, and yet there are these stories of survival that I think, John, are so remarkable, and it's another one of our episodes. Be sure to join us for the next episode as well.